Bonjour à tous. That's a lovely sight. I mean, honestly, it's a pleasure. It's an honor as well to have all of you here. Thank you so much for having taken the time in your heavy schedules. Some of you are coming from other conferences. You've made flights. There are a certain number of people here in the room who personally or their organization has participated in the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network since the inception in 2012. But it's also great to welcome new actors who haven't been part of this exercise yet. And this event is an opportunity to bring them in as well. You are from the different stakeholder groups. You are from governments, from major internet companies, from technical operators, civil society, international organizations, and academia. And you come basically for a little bit more than 30 countries. It's the first time that actually this first Internet and Jurisdiction conference is welcoming about 200 stakeholders to address a very specific and important issue, which is this tension between the cross-border nature of the internet and national jurisdictions. I don't have to explain to you how important this topic is, because this is something that you experience on a daily, in your daily lives, in your own jobs and in your own functions. The tensions range from just legal uncertainty to acute conflicts of laws. They touch upon the activities of billions of people, literally, businesses, and whole communities. They also bring tensions between the stakeholders, between the states and the companies, between civil society and the companies. And we all know that if they are left unaddressed, this can trigger crisis and actually ultimately lead to the demise of some of all the benefits that we really are cherishing that the internet brought. But what we'd like to do today and in the following days is to move this challenge from something that you experience with each other into addressing it as a common problem. There is one overarching structural problem, which is how to organize the coexistence of different norms in shared online spaces. This is not a problem that we have with each other. It's a problem that we have in common and we face. And in a certain way, I think Kofi Annan said it back in 2004, we need to be as innovative in the policy space as the people who invented the internet in the first place. Which means that you represent here, and this is why we wanted to organize this conference, you represent collectively a critical mass of actors and stakeholders. You do have the power to address those issues if you commit to do so. And we all know that if we don't do that, if you don't do that together and with the other actors, it will not come magically. The solutions will not come on their own, and nobody else is likely to be able to do it. So this is why we decided to convene this conference. It will become an annual event. There will be another one in 2017. And the purpose is to trigger and foster mutual understanding, trust, cooperation, and identify how to move forward. We'll talk about this later, but those problems cannot be solved in series of panels. It cannot be solved even in series of conferences. It requires ongoing work, and that's what we're trying to catalyze here. Thank you again for coming here. This event is building, and the input paper that you received is building actually on the work that Internet and Jurisdiction has done and facilitated in the last 4 years. And I'll let Paul say a few words about what we've done.
Thank you very much. First of all, it is a great pleasure to see you all here today. This first Global Internet and Jurisdiction Conference marks really an important milestone for the global multi-stakeholder policy network, Internet and Jurisdiction. As you know, through regional, global and thematic meetings, we are fostering a dialogue process that is neutral and builds trust among the different stakeholders. And this is necessary to allow the coexistence of different norms and laws in shared cross-border online spaces. And responding to the pressing needs of the global community and addressing those challenges, the work of the policy network, Internet and Jurisdiction, is structured around 3 clusters or programs that are also reflected in the structure of this conference today and during the next 3 days. They are data and jurisdiction, with the overarching question of how can transnational data flows and the protection of privacy be reconciled with lawful access requirements to address abuses. Content and jurisdiction, with the question of how can the global availability of content be handled given the diversity of local laws and norms. And domains and jurisdiction, with the overarching question of how can the neutrality of the technical layers of the internet be preserved when enforcing laws on the domain name system. Since 2012, we have organized over 80 policy events in more than 30 countries in order to enable multi-stakeholder cooperation, promote legal interoperability, and establish due process across borders. And as neutral secretariat of the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network, we have also participated in numerous international conferences and processes in order to raise awareness about those challenges and its multiple dimensions. And it is now a great pleasure to formally open this conference with our distinguished speakers. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Carl Bildt, the former Swedish Prime Minister, former Swedish Foreign Minister, and Chairman of the Global Commission on Internet Governance. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. And let me start by the obvious. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be in Paris. It's not spring, but it's still Paris. So we take it from there. And I've been asked to speak primarily, I think, because I was chairing the Global Commission on Internet Governance, and we delivered our final report, I think 2 or 3 months ago by now, after 29 of us, me among them, had worked for 2 years, meeting all over the world, in Stockholm, in Bangalore, in Ottawa, in Palm Springs, in Accra, in London, in Amman, and probably a couple of other exclusive places that I have forgotten. And our mission was really to produce a report that was going to bring to the attention not primarily of people like you, but of the other ones, the policy makers across the world that are not sufficiently aware of the magnitude, both of the possibilities that are there, but also of the challenges to bring these issues to the attention of those. And in addition to the report that we issued, we had assembled a fairly wide research network, a network of research people from all over the world that published, I think, more than 50 different papers that you can find on the net that deals with everything from, needless to say, the jurisdictions issues to cybersecurity, to the rules governing state surveillance or the necessity of such rules, or the magnitude of the challenges that we find on the dark web, all of the different governance issues that are really proliferating as we speak. As I think we are aware of, in a very short period of time, the internet has become the by far most important infrastructure of the world. But rapidly, we see the internet also becoming the infrastructure of every other infrastructure of our societies and economies. There are some people that's very popular these days to talk about us being in what was called the fourth industrial revolution. And that, to some extent, is probably true. But even more true, I think, is the fact that we are in the end phase of the industrial revolution and the beginning of a truly digital age, with promises and potential that is enormous in economic, in social, in political terms, vast opportunities, also for those nations that sort of missed out on the industrial age, empowering individuals and empowering networks, unleashing a new wave of digital entrepreneurship all across the world. I think all of this is familiar to you. But also the challenges that are there. And in our work, in discussions all over the world, in public opinion polling and other ways, we quickly identified a growing deficit of trust that does endanger the very future of the net. A lack of trust in how governments and private companies as well handle all of the data and the rapidly growing issues of privacy. A lack of trust in the stability and the security of the net itself. A lack of trust in the ecosystem of governance of the net, as well as on the possibilities of governance on the net. And if this growing trust deficit isn't handled, the very future of the internet and the global future could be at risk. Risk from governments that are enforcing data localization and digital sovereignty or information sovereignty or whatever they prefer to call it, from private companies setting up their own digital walled up empires, and from individuals who are simply opting out of all of the digital opportunities that are there. And that is why action is needed. But before action, I would say there's a profound need of thinking, of reflecting and discussing, because these are, to put it mildly, not easy issues. They challenge the very foundations of our Westphalian global order, and how they are addressed will shape our global digital future. And that is why a gathering of this sort is so important. Identifying all of the questions, and I think a very good preparatory work has been done prior to this conference, and from there we must step by step work towards the answers. And I underline that carefully, step by step. I think a rush to answers might well take us off in the wrong directions, and that would have grave consequences for the future. At the bottom must always be respect for the fundamental freedoms and rights as laid down in the United Nations Declaration. What applies offline must equally apply online. That's fundamental. And let's not forget that the functions of states is to protect these very rights. It is for that reason that states have a duty to uphold the law. But what was relatively easy for states in the old days of borders and more or less absolute national sovereignty becomes, of course, increasingly challenging in an age of rapidly increasing digital interdependence of our societies and economies, and they are evolving in a deeper and deep digital symbiosis with each other. At some point in, I think, a somewhat distant future, we might arrive at a global consensus on a global ecosystem for governance on the net in every single respect. But today we are very far from that. And there are differences in the value system between different regimes, as well as between different societies, that create obvious difficulties and make that step-by-step approach, I think, essential. Seeking, step-by-step, practical solutions, as we seek to gradually build trust and gradually establishing practices that eventually work without infringing upon the values and rights that are fundamental to our society. That's why these days in Paris are so important. I wish success for the discussions and certainly look forward to the result of the discussions being made available to the wider global policy-making community so that we can take it, the discussions, the deliberations, and the solutions forward together. We are, step by step, building the governance of our digital future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Douglas Frantz. He's the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, which organized this year the ministerial meeting on the digital economy in Cancun. And the OECD is also one of the institutional supporters of this conference. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Paul. And thanks to you and Bertrand for inviting the OECD to come here and for the special relationship that we have. I think we value the work that you do and we value our cooperation with you very much. So I'm very pleased to be here at this first global conference of your network. I'm also proud of the OECD's work on this topic, and I think it's a place where we've convened a large group of stakeholders and heard some important views that will go toward forming the basis of the regulations that Carl Bildt was just talking about. The Internet's global, interconnected, and interoperable nature has created extraordinary social and economic benefits. It has spurred innovation on an international scale. Indeed, the Internet is borderless, but laws are not. And that creates a real need for more international cooperation. This cooperation is becoming an increasingly important theme of our work at the OECD. In a recent study on the future of productivity, for example, we concluded that international coordination is needed more and more across a number of policy areas. Those areas include financial support for basic research and international property rights, and taxation and good governance. On the flip side of that coin, we at the OECD see a growing need for international cooperation where internet laws are concerned. All countries have laws governing aspects of the internet. Under those laws, governments and private parties send demands to internet businesses in other countries. They ask them to remove online content, to seize domain names, provide confidential information about users. These demands and requests come from many different jurisdictions. They vary in nature. They require different types of evidence and response times. They don't necessarily give adequate assurance that the requester is authentic, nor do they necessarily have the legal authority to make that demand. And they don't necessarily explain how any conflict of laws between jurisdictions should be resolved. So as things stand now, processing all these different requests is very resource intensive. It can hit small and medium-sized businesses especially hard. For some small internet firms, handling these requests can make it impossible to stay in business. A barrage of requests and demands, legitimate or otherwise, can have an effect on the bottom line of larger companies and their ability to do their business. Faced with that kind of threat, companies may decide to simply ignore all requests unless they come with a court order from their own jurisdiction, or they may comply with all of them without any resistance, just to get them out of the way as quickly as possible. Both outcomes are bad because they decrease the internet's openness. If a country finds that its requests are being systematically ignored by foreign companies, it's likely to resort to enacting mandatory data localization laws. Alternatively, if recipients give in every time they receive a request, we can count on unwarranted takedowns, seizures, and transfers of user information. The result is reduced access to online information and deeply, deeply damaged trust among users. Just ask US cloud computing companies about the impact of Ed Snowden's revelations on US spying on the internet to see what the consequences can be if users feel that they can no longer trust the companies. One of the key messages from the OECD ministerial meeting on the digital economy in Cancun last June is that internet openness brings powerful benefits. We must ensure that openness, and that's why you're here to help us down that road for the next 3 days. For example, openness boosts international trade. Digitally deliverable services amounted to 1/3 of US exports in 2011. On PayPal alone, $44 billion in transactions crossed international borders in 2013. And that's just a glimpse of the potential magnitude of economic disruption should internet-based flows be constrained. And there's more. Internet openness increases innovation and entrepreneurship, unleashes productivity, and provides new opportunities for enriching social well-being. Against this backdrop, the OECD is launching a major project on seizing the benefits of digitalization for growth and well-being, on helping countries harness the internet and other digital technologies for prosperity. So, bottom line, the stakes are high. The question isn't, should we do something about procedural interoperability, but can we afford not to? Your work here can help preserve the internet's global character and avoid its fragmentation into smaller mini-nets. Streamlining the legal procedures across borders so that it's easier, faster, and more efficient for everyone involved is a pressing challenge. Perhaps not for internet giants like Google and Facebook, who have the resources to keep track of national laws and handle myriad requests, but certainly for smaller companies with innovative business models that attract these requests as well. A more streamlined system for them can make a huge difference. And I know that the internet and the INJ aims to streamline the system. The OECD welcomes this project, not only for what it is doing, but for how it is going about it. Through our Principles for Internet Policymaking publication, the OECD promotes the development of voluntary codes of conduct through multi-stakeholder processes exactly like this one. As a backdrop for your discussions, I also want to share with you 3 key messages from the OECD ministerial meeting in Cancun in June. I think that they underscore the importance of this conference and of the efforts to devise fair, transparent, efficient, and interoperable cross-border procedures. First, stimulating digital innovation across the economy is essential. Digital divides need to be bridged, particularly for small and medium enterprises. Digital innovation thrives under favorable framework conditions that support the transformation of traditional sectors and the development of new markets. Investors are far more likely to fund innovative new internet businesses if they don't have to worry about a lack of procedural interoperability, adding greatly to the costs of startups. Second, consumer trust is a key element of boosting the digital economy's growth. A common theme raised throughout the ministerial and already mentioned here was the importance of trust, transparency, and due process. So when cross-border requests for data takedowns, domains, and domain name seizures are made, users need assurances that their legal rights are being protected. Procedural interoperability will help make that happen. Third and finally, a related message is that to achieve economic and social prosperity in the digital economy, digital security and privacy risk must be managed. INJ will need to build adequate security and privacy protections into its platforms in order to gain the trust of users and of governments as well. So you have your work cut out for you the next 3 days, and I hope you have a productive and enlightening conference, and thank you again for inviting the OECD.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Nicklas Lundblad. He's the Vice President and Head of Public Policy and Government Relations for Europe, Middle East and Africa at Google.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting us. We're very happy to be here. As a company, we have lived with these issues since even before we were born. When John Perry Barlow managed to write about the independence of cyberspace in 1996, leading to Post and Johnson in 1998, and Jack Goldsmith, that's right where we began. And ever since 1998, when Google was founded, until now, we have been living with these issues and tried to address them and think about them. So we believe that the project's work is absolutely essential because far too often we get stuck between this fear of splinter nets and the fear of cyber anarchy, and we don't really try to bridge the gap. And I think you managed to do that in a way that is commendable and useful and helpful going forward. Now, I belong to those who believe that it's important to look at different kinds of responses to technological change, and one of the most important responses are institutional responses. Harvard sociobiologist E.O. Wilson famously noted at some point that our challenge, the challenge of our age, is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. It's well found. It's really well found, and I do believe that in the sort of tension between those three layers, between our emotions, our institutions, and our godlike technology, we have a lot of work to do. It doesn't only hold true for jurisdiction, but it holds true for several different things. And what I'd like to do is to just send 4 questions into the coming 3 days, because I think that's probably the best way to seed the discussions that we're having, rather than give recommendations. And the 4 questions are, they're quite simple in a sense, but I do believe that we can learn a lot from exploring them together. And the first one is very simple. It is, what can we learn from the pre-Westphalian principles of jurisdiction? You know, the notion of imperium that we saw in the medieval ages was not primitive. It was not a notion that was, you know, in any way unnuanced. For sure, imperium describes the reach of the ruler's sword, but it was more nuanced than that. If you go back to the sources and you read Bartolus and some of the medieval writers on this subject, they identify more than 18 different shades of imperium or jurisdiction. They thought a lot about how jurisdiction looks if it's not connected to territoriality. And I believe that it might actually be worthwhile for us to examine those writings and that thinking that went into that pre the Westphalian order. The second thing I think is worthwhile for us to understand, or at least ask ourselves, is how would we solve this if we were solving the issue of jurisdiction not between nation states, but between cities? If you increase the number of nodes in the jurisdictional network, if you increase the number of actors, and you increase also, I think, their incentive to cooperate, what would this look like then? And it's important because, again, we can go to history and we can learn from German town law and other kinds of syndicated jurisdiction that could allow us to find new models and new ways of thinking. Thirdly, I think we have to think hard about how we can increase connectivity between legal systems. That's something that is hardly news to anyone, but solving that problem, solving that enigma is something that I think would help everyone, including companies, to get the kind of clarity and openness and balance that we're looking for. And fourthly, what can technology do? And I will outline what I think technology can't do. I don't think there's a technological fix to these problems. I don't think there is a machine or some kind of algorithm that we can put in place and everything will solve itself. But I do believe that there may be technological complements. And it's an interesting question to ask, how we design systems built on new institutions, informed by a new understanding of the concepts we're working with, and supported by technology that will allow us to keep both the openness, the economic engine that the internet is, and yet still all of those basic fundamental rights that we all hold dear and cherish. So with the ongoing work, I would just like to say that we are inspired what you have done here, and we're looking forward to see where we get to in the next 3 days, but we also know that it's much more than the next 3 days. And as a company, as a partner to the project, we commit ourselves to continuing that discussion for a long time until we get beyond those basic misunderstandings that I think we're still stuck in today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Nwakanma. She is the Africa Regional Coordinator of the World Wide Web Foundation that was founded by Tim Berners-Lee. You have the floor.
Thank you. Hello, ladies. Oh, and gentlemen. My name is Nnenna, and I come from the internet. That's normally how I introduce myself, because I feel that the internet has been very capital in building people like myself. I was fortunate to be one of those early Africans who got access to the internet and its culture, which was dominated by collaboration and oneness and spirit. And that ability to be part of a community, sharing knowledge for the common good without payment, was what allowed someone like me to be who I am today. And I would like to pause to say thank you to people like Nwakanma, who gave part of their life so that people like me can also be. I know him because he is one of the fathers of the African internet, but across here, I know there are a lot of us, a lot of you, who have worked in many ways to build the internet that we know today. So I'm first and foremost a net citizen, like I call myself. And I think that if we are also here, it's because we want to be part of the building, not just today, but also tomorrow. So for me, I care for the past. I work as the Africa Regional Coordinator of the World Wide Web Foundation. So I work on the present of the internet, and mostly I am concerned about the future, and that is why I am here. And I think that is also why most of us are here at the moment. When I started working with the Web Foundation, I got a great opportunity to look into the culture of the open web, to meet Tim Berners-Lee himself, because he's the founder of my organization. And I talked with him and tried to understand why he could create what we know today as the web, and after inventing it, decide to give it away free to humanity without royalties, so that everyone can be part of the building and can also be part of those who will benefit from it. So I believe that everyone is the key word. Everyone in this room, whether you are from technology, whether you're from government policy, civil society like myself, or from media, if you're an academic, if you're an engineer, if you're a policy expert, or if you're an individual user, everyone here is a creator of the World Wide Web. It's part of the internet world. So that brings us to the original vision of Sir Tim Berners-Lee, which is a web that truly serves humanity and empowers everyone, everywhere, to take part in building a fairer world. So to everyone, maybe we'll also add everywhere. Everyone, everywhere. So the spirit of openness, of advancing the common good, is what has helped us so far. And I truly believe that moving forward, it will also be what will help us get ahead. I try to compare the web to what the press of Gutenberg was, which is like a leveling field for knowledge for many people. So we have companies, big companies today like Amazon, Google, or Facebook, who have moved to be global businesses, and they would not be here did we not have the internet. So this permissionless reality has allowed for wealth to be created and is the greatest infrastructure, like has been mentioned, around us. But for me, it has enabled also governments to communicate more directly with their citizens, more public services, more effective public management, and has allowed citizens to access information about rights, health, education, and communities. I work in Africa. I live in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan. Every day I speak with young people, people younger than myself, people who ask, how can I be sure that the education I'm getting online, when they give me the certificate, other people will respect it? I work with young people who are saying, I need a job and I'm trying to make myself better so I can work online and make money. I speak with people who want to begin e-commerce, but they know that in many countries in Africa, they can open PayPal account, they can pay money, but they cannot receive money, and they want to know why. I work with people who want to buy online, but they are not sure how they can pay, and if they pay and there is a problem with the goods they buy, what can be done? I talk with job seekers who are asking, how can I be effective even if I'm in my own country, and can I work everywhere? So I work with people who meet you on the street and say, I need internet connection, can you help me? So I speak with a lot of people, but there is one key word that comes across everybody I speak to. They are looking up to an internet of opportunities. Whether they are businesses, whether they are big, small businesses, whether they are rural women, or whether they are young girls, everybody is looking up to us to create opportunities. So everyone, everywhere, and opportunities. But as we face challenges that bring us here today, I want to point out 3 of those. The first is opportunity, of course. How do we safeguard and build the web's equalizing power? How do we ensure it creates social, political, and economic opportunity for everyone, everywhere? How do we magnify this? How do we make it to everybody so that word everybody can actually be real? In this year's SDGs, we are saying leave no one behind. And I believe that the internet is that infrastructure that allows us to really leave no one behind. How do we keep it open? How do we continue keeping it open for everyone? How do we use it as a platform for expression? How do we use it as a platform against centralized and controlled web where there is limited option? How do we increase? How do we open up more options for people? And there is that increasing battle between privacy and security. Governments want security and citizens also want security. So it's not an either or, it is and. We have to work both. I'm so sorry that Frank LaRue is not yet here. He has a very nice way of explaining it. We cannot do one and not do the other. So everyone who's in this room has a task in the 3 days and beyond to make sure we find the balance between privacy and security. There are many more challenges, but I'm going to stick to those. It belongs to all of us. It is for everyone. It is for everyone, everywhere. It's not just for one government. It is not just for one stakeholder. It is for all of us. It's not just for the industry. It's no longer an academic stuff. It's no longer a defense issue. It is for everybody who is here. And when we're talking about stakeholder issues, maybe I should add jurisdiction beyond boundaries, yes, sir, but beyond race, beyond language, beyond culture, beyond religion, beyond age, beyond occupation, beyond those who support Manchester United and Manchester City. So we have to look at everybody. When we talk about everybody, we're talking about everybody. So before we start the conversations, the question I want to ask us is, what kind of internet do we want? The one that encourages competition and economic growth, that boosts productivity, that is creative and allows for freedom of expression, that drives innovation, that is inclusive for everyone? I think, yes, those and even more. At the Web Foundation, we want to offer all of these and more. And like I said, everyone, everywhere, leaving no one behind. So I believe that if I'm here today, it's not because I want to be in France at this time. I'm not excited to be here, trust me. It is cold and I'm not connected. I have been offline for the past 1 hour and my brain is nearly shutting down. So this is not an exciting time for me to be here, but it is a very important time because I know that everybody sitting in this room is crucial to the future of the internet. And that is why I could pack up, hop on a flight at 23 hours, get here at 8 o'clock, and come straight to this place because I believe that you sitting here can make it possible, an internet of opportunities, the internet of trust, an internet of economic benefit for everyone, everywhere. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for those opening remarks. As Nnenna already said, unfortunately, Frank LaRue, the Assistant Director General of UNESCO, cannot be here at this very moment. He will join us later today. But thank you very much for those very inspiring interventions.
So I don't think that these introductory remarks could have been better at highlighting the stakes. The problems we're facing or addressing here are basically touching upon, as we said earlier, the economy, human rights, security, and many other aspects. They're not abstract problems. There are very, very daily issues, and they're becoming more and more sensitive for all the different actors. But beyond that, and I would like to follow on some of the things that were said before, I would like to step back just 1 second and highlight that this is actually an historic challenge. The word Westphalia has been mentioned several times. The international system that we have today is very simple to understand. You take the surface of the Earth, you draw very nice 2D shapes that map the whole surface, and voila, you have an international system with the authority of governments on this territorial space. And as Nnenna was mentioning, the reference to the printing press is the origin of all this. Because if you don't have maps, if you don't have printed laws, you cannot have this system. And it has worked pretty well for 400 years. The only problem is that it works on the separation of sovereignties. It works on the principle of non-interference. And what we're dealing with here is a situation where we're not in separate sovereignties and very rare cross-border interactions. Transnational is the new normal. And the international system, that has a lot of merits, is struggling to face those challenges because of one fundamental element connected to territoriality, is that now, because of the services, because of the user's location, because of the incorporation of the companies, you can take many territorial attachments, and you can have several jurisdictions competing to solve or to apply their own norms. In addition, the international system, and all my fellow, I used to be in the government or in administration, all my fellow representatives from governments know that the fundamental principle of the international order is non-cooperation. Cooperation is an option, it's not the default. In the topics we're addressing here, cooperation is the obligation and should be the default. And this is one of the major struggles. The situation that we're in is a situation of high uncertainty. Uncertainty about what the applicable laws are, uncertainty about who is setting the norm, who it applies to, and who adjudicates them. And the main problem with this is that in this environment of uncertainty, everybody is trying to solve the problem from the place where they're sitting. And this has a name in game theory. It's called a prisoner's dilemma. You don't know what the others are doing, so you try to make the best from what you have. And the uncoordinated cumulative effect of those decisions actually produce a result that is detrimental for everyone, even for the ones who have taken the decision in the first place. Not only is this a prisoner's dilemma that makes the unintended negative consequences, but it is making the problem harder to solve. It's like a Gordian knot, you know, you're just pulling, and it becomes just tighter. This is not about cutting the Gordian knot, it's about trying to untie it. And a part of what we are going to discuss in the next 2 days, going on the step-by-step approach, there's a question that comes, which is, how do you address a very big problem? You address it the way you eat an elephant, bit by bit. Manageable chunk by manageable chunk. If you want to eat an elephant, sorry. It's a metaphor. So the problem is that, as we said, and Carl Bildt was mentioning the reports that have been produced for the Global Commission on Internet Governance. We produced one that I think is in your bag on the legal arms race that is emerging at the moment, precisely because of this prisoner's dilemma. And so, to reach this objective of the coexistence of different norms in shared online spaces, basically we need cooperation mechanisms that are as transnational as the internet itself. And we need to be, as I said earlier, open to innovation, because the current mechanisms and the current tools that we have are actually finding their limits. We need legal interoperability. When the founders of the internet created the web, they developed standards to create interoperability between heterogeneous systems. What we have today is heterogeneous governance systems. Companies, governments, civil society groups, everybody is a governance system whenever they make a decision. Harmonization is not the solution for those things. It will not come with one swoop. We need legal interoperability between heterogeneous systems and deal with procedural aspects, as was said before. We need humility at the same time, because I think it's important for everyone to recognize that nobody has the solution right now. We're in a sort of paradigm crisis where there are competing solutions. We can try to force again the traditional solutions, like people after the Galileo's telescope tried to do epicycles on the Ptolemaic system, like trying to patch the system. But there was a possibility to also look at the problem from a different perspective, and it's maybe part of the innovation that Nicklas was mentioning. Finally, the main problem that we have is that in order to be innovative and so on, we are struggling with a lack of the appropriate spaces and processes and methodology to handle those things. The mention was made of the distinction between governance of the internet and governance on the internet. For governance of the internet, we have a distributed, multi-stakeholder, emergent ecosystem, institutional ecosystem, that deals with the distribution of IP addresses, that deals with ICANN for the domain names, that deals with the development of the standards and the protocols. And this ecosystem has worked pretty well. It has brought the whole internet to what it is today, the nervous system of humanity, basically, and its activities. For governance on the internet, everything that is related to how people use or misuse the internet, I think it's Laura Denardis who used in a paper the expression, the system is inchoate, i.e. it's not complete, it's not full. We have the Internet Governance Forum, and I know that Marcus Kummer is here, and we owe him a deep amount of gratitude for having put this on track. It is the watering hole every year, and we will report at the next IGF in Guadalajara on the work of this conference. But it is a one annual event, and what is needed is something that is more on an ongoing basis, that is intersessional work as well, that articulates the discussion and the efforts that a large number of actors are doing, including international organizations, the companies themselves, and governments. And so, in order to do this, we think that the approach is an issue-by-issue basis, not a big international organization anew to deal with this. It's issue-by-issue basis and policy networks that bring the relevant actors for each issue. And Paul has mentioned the 3 themes that have actually emerged from the discussions we've facilitated in the last 4 years. But the important thing is to go even further into the concrete aspects. And the sub-theme that were mentioned before regarding the requests that are being sent across borders between the company or the public authorities and private companies for access to user data, content takedown, or domain suspensions is a set of manageable chunks. It is something that can be addressed and that will structure the discussion tomorrow. And so, dealing with the establishment of due process, the establishment of procedures that enshrine human rights in all the procedures that are taking place between the different actors is a major goal, because fundamentally this is not about zero-sum games. This is a very strong message that I want to share. This is not about balancing so much opposing objectives. In many cases, it's possible to reconcile them, and including sometimes by using a technological tool to embed some of the solutions that have been found at the policy level. But the final note is, it is clearly emerging that what is at stake is developing the governance tool for a digital age. It's not only the governance of the internet, or governance on the internet. It's governance in the digital age. It's an exciting objective. It's intellectually stimulating, but it's a very, very challenging thing. And it requires to be humble and to approach this problem with a spirit of cooperation and understanding what the other side is actually feeling, the way people perceive this. And I would maybe ask you in some of the interventions that you will make in this conference to sometimes try to formulate what the entity on the other side of the barrier that you're interacting with is exposed to, how they perceive the problem. Because in many cases, misunderstanding comes from not properly appreciating what the other side is. So with that, we will have 3 days, and we will now structure the work of these 3 days with dedicated operational issues tomorrow. But this afternoon, the goal is to take stock in a certain way of what is the current state of jurisdiction, what are the consequences, potentially, of those uncoordinated actions, and how it resonates with your personal experience. We're excited to have you here, and I give the floor to Paul to introduce the speakers.